Hello and welcome here to a third line day. We're in gate 13, the gate of the listener, the fellowship of man, and the third line is called pessimism. So the 13th gate is both a roll gate, as you've been hearing, and it's also one of the 8 profiling gates. And that means that each of the keynotes here can be applied to any of the relative or the similar lines throughout your chart. And this is a way for you to gather depth in the appreciation of structure, to understand lines through their theme in the continuity, because you then see it through the whole being. Through genetic continuity, we discover that all third lines carry pessimism in them. And no wonder, really. They're always banging into things and they can never imagine doing anything without banging into something. And there's so much that they don't know, and it can be so uncomfortable because they have no control or no handle over what it is that they keep on banging into. The third line, because it is an adaptive line and because it is trial and error, you will have trial and error in who you listen to. It is not the uncontrolled process that happens in the second line. This is a process of tuning in through trial and error to who you listen to who you take in to hear. The lifetime learning says the belief that what is best can never be achieved. This is a lifelong process, something that the third line learns as a curve in its life. Yes, this is its learning process. And what happens is the moment that it is listening to a certain type, it gets to hear what it really doesn't want to hear. It gets to see in a human being what it doesn't really want to see. It tries to listen to something else and the same thing happens again, and it goes through quite a process of disappointment in life about the nature of what a human being is. The exaltation says a lack of trust that can only be transformed through concrete evidence. Openness that is conditioned by suspicion and seeks evidence. This is a possibility for mutation in the abstract process, to make sense out of the past. It helps to have evidence rather than just speculation and suspicion. The 13-3, they can be very suspicious of people. They become deeply mistrusting of them. And they are the kind of people that know the kind of storyline when it's being delivered to them. They get very good at hearing the propaganda or the lies that are coming through and standing up and demanding the truth, wanting the evidence. The whole process of banging into the other and having to be burdened by what they're going to tell you is that the pessimism in humanity can only end when you bang into something that's of value to you. And you're going to find that out when you start living your own true nature, because then you're on time in your geometry to meet the forces that are there to meet you. In the detriment, pessimism exalted to an art form where, as art, it may have the opposite effect. Satire, where the rightness of suspicion can inspire satire. I would imagine that there are a lot of comedians who have this line expressing their pessimism as satire. The third line is in the lower trigram, of course, and so they inherently have difficulty with the other, simply because they have no control. No control mechanism. They don't recognize that the other is going to be there. They don't recognize that the interference in their process is going to be there and that they're going to be forced to share something with the other. This is collective circuitry for you. So, of course, they have a very different relationship to the forces, to the other, than the upper trigram has. So the one thing about realizing that human beings don't live up to this ideal is that they are also humorous in the way that they do not live up to this ideal. And we can call it black humor or gallows humor, but it can become an art form. It becomes satire. So rather than trying to inspire humanity with history and facts, which can be quite brutal, quite frankly, I mean, if you've ever read the historical record of the last century, it's very difficult not to be astounded at just how barbaric humans can be to each other. But here we find satire, and satire can have the same effect. It can inspire humanity with the humor of pessimism. The impact of pessimism as art is that it kind of humiliates us to the point where we laugh at ourselves. And perhaps that has some impact on our overall direction. Because the 13th gate is a gate of secrets, every time the lower trigram gets access to the throat, what pops out is something that the 13th gate might really be unprepared for, because it's not consciously holding on to what it is listening to in that gate. The 13th gate, where memory is stored. How that memory pops out is dependent on the 33 that steps into its aura, or on whatever way it gets that information out. Often that satire can be cruel. It could be bitter. Remember, this is a projector gate. There can be bitterness, resentment, and sometimes 13-3s can say things to people that are just devastating, which can actually be a form of satire. It can be taken as humor. It depends on the delivery. It could be taken as something that is just bitterly cruel. So the grounding is found in gate 7 in the third line, called the anarchist. And just as all third lines carry pessimism, so do they all carry the flavor of anarchy. And for the third line, being able to see what needs changing, what isn't working, what to tear down because it's broken, and not having anything to replace it with, perhaps this could also fuel the pessimism that is found in gate 13. Or perhaps fuel isn't quite the right word here, because there's no fuel in the G center, of course. But there is an underlying understanding between these two mirror gates through genetic continuity and through both being collective, both having an understanding of the pressures of being a third line within the collective social structure. The moon is still in gate 51. Since 2:30 this morning. Is the heart center gate of shock, and then it moves into gate 42 at 11:57. This is the gate of growth, and it is making a channel with Mars, which is in gate 53, the gate of beginnings. This channel is called maturation, and it is the format channel for the abstract sensing circuit, part of collectivity again, with its keynote of sharing, and with a focus on seeing a cycle through from its correct beginning to its correct ending, moving through each experience without expectation, making sense of the confusion, going through the whole circuit and ending up in the 1333, where the experience is finally shared with the collective. The moon moves into gate 3 at 21:25. This is the individual gate of ordering, difficulty at the beginning. And again, it's a format energy, this time carrying the individual pulse energy that gives rise to mutation, or not. We have the keynote of empowering here. Mutation brings something new that can empower everyone. And lastly, the moon moves into gate 27 at 6:56 tomorrow morning. This is the gate of caring and nourishment. It's a sacral gate. It is also tribal. It's in the defense circuit with its keynote of support. So the moon is bringing us the flavor of all three circuits today. And what we learn here is that we have to care and nourish for ourselves before we extend that to others. This is one of those simple but not easy things that we come across so often. So thank you for joining me for this third line. I'll be back tomorrow for our fourth line. And until then, as always, take care of yourself, love yourself, and go gently.